Welcome to Uptown Radio. It's Thursday, April 25th. I'm your host, Zoe E.
And I'm Tommaso Baronio. We are now in the second week of the Trump hush money trial, and it's creating all sorts of drama outside the courthouse.
This is a great day for democracy, a great day for the rule of law.
This is a travesty. This is not a trial. This is not a case. This is nonsense.
COVID-19 may no longer be a global emergency, but it's still here. Some New Yorkers remain hesitant about taking the vaccine.
I don't know anything about it. It's a whole new thing.
Later on, we discuss how religious institutions in New York are embracing psychedelics.
It's something that you see all over the world. I once heard that the only people on Earth who do not use any kind of intoxicant traditionally are in the North Pole.
The North Pole sounds freezing. Fortunately, things are heating up in New York.
And especially on the Columbia campus. More on that later, but first, here are the headlines.
Former president of the United States should enjoy from criminal prosecution. Former President Trump has argued for absolute immunity. The case will determine whether Trump should stand trial on charges related to the 2020 election and the federal prosecutor's case that he participated in efforts to subvert election results. NPR's Carrie Johnson has more.
Majority of the justices that I heard seemed uncomfortable with giving former President Donald Trump for the first time some kind of blanket immunity, and the most outrageous and extreme hypotheticals his lawyer was suggesting, things like being able to assassinate a political rival, mount a coup, order the military to kill other people. At the same time, the conservative justices seem very concerned about the possibility of crippling future presidents and tying their hands.
NPR's Carrie Johnson reporting the future of a pro-Palestinian protest encampment on the campus of Columbia University in New York is unclear. Gwen Hogan with the local news website The City reports.
Talks between student negotiators and university officials are ongoing on this 8th straight day that students have been camping out on the university's South Lawn. They're demanding the university divest from companies that profit off the war in Gaza. Columbia administrators set a 48-hour timeline to come to an agreement, but there's confusion about when exactly it expires, at midnight or later in the day Friday. The university has yet to clarify, but has said it is hoping to resolve the situation through negotiations with students. In the week since Columbia students set up camp on the South Lawn, students at universities all over the country have set up similar encampments. For NPR News, I'm Gwen Hogan in New York.
At Emory University in Atlanta, police today used pepper balls and tasers as they arrested several students and staff who set up an encampment there. In Boston last night, police took down a pro-Palestinian protest encampment at Emerson College. Over 100 were arrested. This is the 10th anniversary of the start of the Flint water crisis. Michigan Public's Steve Carmody reports.
The intent was to save money, switching to a less expensive source of drinking water for the financially strapped city. The result was improperly treated water from the new source damaged aging pipes, releasing high levels of lead and other contaminants into Flint's tap water, making it undrinkable and a health hazard. Former Mayor Karen Weaver complains Flint residents are still waiting for justice.
No one's been held accountable and no one has gotten a dime. And many people won't be here if we ever get a dime.
Tens of thousands of Flint residents are still waiting to see if they will receive a share of a more than $600 million settlement with the state of Michigan and others. For NPR News, I'm Steve Carmody in Flint, Michigan.
On Wall Street at the close, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was down 375, the NASDAQ off 100. This is NPR.
In New York, I'm Desiree Nick-Farjam. Here at Columbia, student protesters have about 12 hours from now to come to a decision with the university administration. The school has agreed to one of the protesters' demands, transparency in the school's investments. Still to be determined whether the university will divest from all companies doing business with Israel and amnesty for any of the student protesters. If a decision is not made by 4 a.m., it is unclear whether they will have to pack their tents from the Gaza Solidarity encampment. The campus is still closed to the public, and at 6:30 this evening, a United for Israel counter-protest will be held outside campus gates. And as you heard in the NPR newscast, a New York appeals court overturned Harvey Weinstein's 2020 rape conviction this morning. Actress and activist Ashley Judd's testimony was critical to Weinstein's conviction. She spoke on today's appeal in solidarity with victims of sexual assault.
And today is a day, like every day in American women's lives, when male sexual violence has intruded and disrupted our lives.
Some New Yorkers are also upset about the overturning. Here's one.
I was shocked and I was appalled for that verdict to be overturned, for all those women that were sexually assaulted.
Weinstein, who is 72, will still be imprisoned in California for an unrelated rape conviction, for which he was sentenced 16 years. And New Yorkers, be ready. Hotels and bunkers for bees are coming. It's all part of a new initiative by the city in partnership with the Horticulture Society of New York and Rutgers University to make the city more hospitable for bees throughout the city. The city tested the project last year in Brooklyn and the Bronx and will now place bee hotels in Manhattan and Staten Island. And in sports, the Knicks are in Philadelphia tonight for Game 3 of the NBA playoffs, and the NFL draft begins tonight with both the Giants and Jets picking in the top 10. The weather is currently 54 degrees, and there are fairly clear skies throughout this evening with a low of 40 degrees. In New York, I'm Desiree Nick-Farajam.
Donald Trump was back in court today for the day 3 of his hush money trial. He is being charged with fraud over hush money payment of $130,000 Trump made to cover up an alleged affair with former porn star Stormy Daniels.
Trump made the payment to his lawyer at the same time at that time, Michael Cohen, who was later reimbursed. So is this fraud? The prosecution says yep, but Trump and his team say no. Our reporter Dominic Hall-Thomas was at the courthouse this morning following the trial. Hi, Dom.
Hey, Zoe.
So what was it like in court today? Set the scene for us, please.
Well, it was another packed day at the courthouse, and Trump didn't seem too keen to be there as he looked pretty solemn. And in fact, he wasn't keen to be there at all. He had actually asked to skip today's session to sit in while the Supreme Court hears a case on presidential immunity, which could have major bearing on many of his legal problems, a request that the judge had denied.
So where did today's proceedings begin?
Well, Trump wasn't required to give any evidence today, so he sat completely silent all morning, but he hadn't been silent outside of the courtroom. So the day started with objections from the prosecution accusing him of contempt of court after he made comments about the judge and the trial outside of the courthouse earlier this week. But the real business of the day was about David Pecker, who is the ex-publisher of the National Enquirer, who took the stand to testify. Until 2020, he ran the National Enquirer and a bunch of other local tabloids, the kind of paper that you might see lining the shelves of a local bodega or somewhere.
This is the second day Pecker has testified, isn't it? So what's he testifying about?
Well, he's testifying about actually a pretty astonishing episode that happened whilst he was the CEO. Back in 2016, former Playboy bunny Karen McDougal approached the National Enquirer trying to sell them a story about an alleged affair between herself and Trump. Pecker says Michael Cohen, Trump's attorney at the time, encouraged him to buy and then suppress the story so as not to taint Trump's reputation in the run-up to the 2016 election. Pecker ended up paying $150,000. There was even a contract for the deal. It included the rights to any other story relating to romantic or physical relationships between McDougal and any other married man, can you believe? Essentially buying her silence. She was also offered writing roles at a number of fitness magazines. And the key point here is that Pecker says he was reimbursed by the Trump campaign for his troubles. In fact, the courtroom, he testified, Cohen said, "Don't worry, the boss will take care of it," implying that Trump was always planning on paying him back.
So what was Trump's reaction to Pecker's testimony?
In all honesty, he looked pretty bored. Aside from that, he was business as usual. He was dressed in all black, long red tie. He barely moved a muscle, even as some of pretty damning evidence was read out.
So Pecker's testimony, his accusations of hush money payments, these are all wrapped up in Trump's other legal troubles?
Yeah, basically. It's all part of a bundle of accusations against Trump that he tried to undermine the integrity of the 2016 election. It's similar to claims that hush money was paid to Stormy Daniels. When Trump allegedly paid off Pecker to kill the story, he was committing campaign funding violations, the prosecution says. So this is on top of falsifying business records relating to the Daniels case. He's now racked up 34 counts of falsified business records, actually, to be exact. So to be continued in court tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thanks, Zoe.
The pro-Palestine protests on campus are making headlines around the world. Have you seen all the cameras and microphones on campus?
It's hard to miss, but people forget protests at American universities have always been a way for students to express their constitutional rights.
I spoke to Professor of Classics Joseph Hawley here at Columbia University. He has been supporting student protesters through FSJP since the fall semester. That's the faculty and staff for Justice in Palestine group. He's been working with students in the encampment.
This week, FSJP folks have been doing de-escalation duty outside the camps, which involves faculty advocacy and faculty governance to protect rights of free expression and academic freedom on campus.
Why an encampment as a protest?
Why not? We've had encampments on university campuses for decades now. It is a time-honored tradition. It's also a very powerful tactic. Nothing is being obstructed except maybe graduation. That gives the students a space to engage in political education, to express themselves, to reach out to other students, to get their message out. And it also gives them a certain amount of very serious but, non-violent leverage in a deeply asymmetrical situation where the university has for years refused to listen to the will of the student body on this issue.
What do you think will happen at the end of the semester?
Well, I think we're all praying for a really calm end to the semester, but I think that university leadership is also hearing loudly and clearly from faculty right now that the application of police force is completely unacceptable, and I hope that they will see that the students are offering them a very feasible way out of this.
What does the resolution look like?
Well, the students have, I think, some pretty reasonable demands. I don't know exactly what's on the negotiating table right now, but their basic demands are amnesty for politicized disciplinary measures. I think that's very easy to do. Disclosure of investments, that's very easy to do.
What will it take for students to regain trust in the university after this?
This is a question that senior university leaders have been asking me in recent days, and I think that there is a simple answer with two parts. The university must seriously and sincerely and in good faith demonstrate to students that they are members of the community and they can be heard and trusted and empowered as such, and that the university will protect them from bad faith and hostile political actors beyond the campus. Neither of those things is happening right now. That's what's driving this whole movement, aside from the students' sincere concern about Israel-Palestine. And if the university can simply demonstrate to everyone that they are concerned about the students, that they recognize the students as part of this community rather than antagonists, if they can convince the students that their voice is being heard and convince the students that they will be protected by the university, then I think we are well on our way to a resolution.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was my conversation with Joseph Hawley, professor of classics here at Columbia University. He is also a member of faculty and staff of Justice in Palestine.
The U.S. government has officially given TikTok's Chinese parent company ByteDance less than a year to find a buyer or face a ban in the U.S.
Lawmakers say the issue is national security, specifically whether TikTok is sharing information about users in the U.S. with the Chinese government, and charged TikTok as repeatedly denied.
James Lewis is a senior director at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He says whatever happens next, it's not going to help U.S.-China relationships.
Well, the Chinese have already made it clear they're not going to concede anything, right? And you can't blame them. They're very proud of it, and they're very protective. So forced sale is going to face a lot of opposition from China. If TikTok doesn't want to be sold, the Chinese government will support it. And that means head-on collision. Ban, I'm not quite sure about, because it's difficult to ban things in the U.S. You've got the First Amendment. There's ways to make life difficult for TikTok, But I worry less about the ban. I think the real intent of the bill is to force ByteDance, TikTok's owner, to sell to a non-Chinese company.
But then you said it's hard to ban it, and then if China doesn't want to sell it, how is that going to settle?
The only thing that would make any sense is some of TikTok's owners want to sell. They'd like to cash out. And so if you can find a way that would let them cash out, and most people are looking at what's called an initial public offering, an IPO, where TikTok would become a public company, that could be a way out, because that's the one place where ByteDance has an interest. Banning doesn't make sense. Forced sale doesn't make sense. IPO, you would have some cooperation from ByteDance.
I know the national security can be a very sensitive topic, but is there any evidence that you can reveal that China is espionaging the U.S.?
One of the things when you're talking about TikTok is technology is one of the areas of competition. It's also an area that people can use for espionage advantage, right? And possibly for military advantage. And in both cases, the U.S. has caught China doing things. In fact, we have a list at CSIS of, I think, more than 120 examples of Chinese espionage. My current favorite is political interference, because the Chinese government actually bussed students into a district, gave them false identity so they could vote in that election and vote for a pro-Chinese candidate.
What do you think China is doing with the information they get from TikTok in the U.S.? Because as far as I know, that TikTok in China and TikTok in the U.S. have two different servers. So at least the users cannot communicate between these two apps.
That's a really good question. And there was an example in 2015 where the Chinese intelligence agencies broke into the Office of Personnel Management and stole the personal data of 17 million Americans, all government employees who had clearances. And people said, oh, well, they're going to use it to blackmail us. They're going to use it to design influence campaigns. We haven't seen any of that. It's been a decade. So why the Chinese are collecting this stuff, I don't know. But it's pretty safe to assume they're collecting it.
Thank you so much, James, for being here.
Thank you.
And now, as part of our personal perspectives, Irina Humeniuk shows us what we can gain when we lose trust in institutions.
It was a crazy idea, sure, but what was even crazier was staying home. I was sick, worse this time, and my mother wanted to fly to Ukraine to get medical help during a full-scale Russian invasion. What could go wrong? I understood her logic. Socialized healthcare in Canada is good in theory but bad in practice. There are not enough doctors to go around, not enough time allotted to each patient, and limitations to the kind of tests a doctor can order. It can take months to see a specialist, and by then, it can be too late. But in Ukraine, where the free market, not state regulations, rule, if you have the money, you can order whatever tests you want, get any procedures you want, and all of it is faster, more accessible, and cheaper than in Canada or the US. So in early May, after months of toiling in the Canadian medical system that ended with my doctors telling me they were out of ideas, I packed my bags for Ukraine. We spent the next 2 weeks cramped in my grandmother's tiny Soviet-style apartment outside of Lviv, shuttling between medical appointments. Periodically, Ukrainian soldiers stopped us at checkpoints to search the trunk for Ukrainians fleeing conscription. But still, for me and my health problems, no answers. I was exhausted and demoralized, ready to give up. Baba wasn't. She had endured an oppressive life in the former Soviet Union. Her bullish persistence had gotten her through an abusive first marriage. It's what allowed her, at the height of her career, to be the sole female owner of 3 separate businesses. No small feat for any woman at the time. Determination was not something my family lacked. And then, on our last day together, Baba said, "We found him." Turns out that the medical doctor turned iridologist that my grandma praised was back. He'd been in the Carpathian Mountains collecting herbs. We piled into his office a few hours later. He told us he'd take a picture of my irises, run it through some software, and diagnose me. It seemed ludicrous. My first thought was, had Baba sent me to a quack? And then my second, I was so desperate to get better, I was willing to listen to anyone. Within moments, I had my diagnosis. He wrote me a prescription for a drug, and brought me 2 bushels of herbs he had picked from the mountains to drink as tea. The next week, miraculously, the pain in my gut started subsiding. It would be the first correct diagnosis of many. I felt seen, even if by the doctor who seemed the least credible, and I was starting to consider that maybe the truth might be more complicated than it first appears. I promised myself never again would I place complete trust or distrust in any one institution. It was also a day when I began to wonder, this skepticism, this gut feeling, is this what it is to be a journalist?
Irina Humaniuk is happy to report that she is learning to trust her gut again. And we're back. You're listening to Uptown Radio, a production of the Columbia Journalism School. I'm Zoe E.
And I'm Tommaso Baronio. Coming up, we examine vaccine hesitancy among New Yorkers.
We also return to the Trump courthouse to discuss the meteor circus involved in covering the trial.
Later, we discuss the challenges behind becoming qualified as foster parent in New York City.
And we also show some more personal perspectives from our reporters. All that and more on Uptown Radio. But first, the news.
For Columbia Radio News, I'm Clara Bowders. The U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments today on whether Donald Trump can claim immunity to charges related to January 6th. Desiree Nick-Farjam reports.
The U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments today on whether Donald Trump can claim immunity to charges related to January 6th. In nearly 3 years of testimony, the justices appeared skeptical, or 3 hours, of testimony, the justices appeared skeptical about granting blanket immunity to the office of the president. In his questions, Justice Neil Gorsuch indicated that former President Donald Trump's specific plea for immunity isn't the main issue here.
And today is a day, like every day in American women's lives, when male sexual violence has intruded and disrupted our lives.
Justice Amy Coney Barrett questioned Donald Trump's attorney, John Sauer, about whether any act committed by a president while in office is a public act.
I was shocked and I was appalled for that verdict to be overturned, for all those women that were sexually assaulted.
Apologies, those are the wrong clips. It's still unclear how quickly they will come to a decision for Donald Trump specifically. Desiree Nick-Farjam, Columbia Radio News.
The Prime Minister of Haiti, Ariel Henry, has resigned. A new presidential council has been sworn in. William O'Neill, a human rights expert on Haiti, says now that transitional officials are in place, it may smooth the way for an outside security force to arrive. Last October, the United Nations Security Council passed a resolution authorizing an international force to be sent into Haiti. Gang violence has killed or injured more than 2,500 people from January to March, and the national police are outgunned and outnumbered by gangs. Kenya has agreed to lead the mission. American officials have confirmed Ukraine has begun using long-range ballistic missiles against Russia that were secretly provided by the U.S. Officials said that the plan had not been announced publicly to prevent the information from falling into the wrong hands. Ukrainian forces have suffered from a shortage of ammunition and air defense systems in recent months, and officials there have blamed delays in military aid from the U.S. and other Western allies for the loss of lives and territory in their country. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said on Wednesday it was possible that Russia could make additional tactical gains in the coming weeks. According to a new report from the Commerce Department, the U.S. economy grew at an annual rate of just 1.6% in the first 3 months of this year. That is a substantial decrease from the end of last year and slower growth than forecasters had expected. But consumer spending, the largest driver of the economy, has held up fairly well. Consumers continue to spend more on services, including restaurant meals and travel, although they've cut back on big purchases like cars and furniture. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Clara Bouders.
Since the Trump hush money trial started last week, journalists from all over the world have packed the courtroom in downtown Manhattan to cover every move of the drama inside.
But what about the drama outside the courtroom? Pascal Ho spent a day outside the courthouse to report on the circus-like atmosphere surrounding the Trump trial, the supporters of the former president, his opponents, and everyone in between.
The trial starts at 9:30, but it's 6 in the morning, and there are already about 50 journalists waiting in line across the street from the courthouse. It's chilly, but Robert Samuel has seen worse.
We've done 0 degrees for Hamilton tickets, so this is child's play.
Samuel is the owner of Same Old Line Dudes, LLC. Media organizations pay him and his team of 30 line sitters to queue up as early as midnight.
So we feel like we're making a dent in history, helping the reporters that we're waiting for report on the events that's going on inside.
Samuel typically charges $25 an hour to wait in line for things like cronuts and Lucali pizza. But for the Trump trial, he's charging double that, plus a $15 premium for unexpected things. As he says this, he's interrupted by a guy on a bike screaming at the top of his lungs.
So, oh God. See, this is the kind of stuff that puts you on edge. The crazies are out, yeah. Because of that reason is why we have the premium.
The professional line sitters are only one sign of the circus unfolding here. The Trump hush money trial has drawn an eclectic mix of people over the past 2 weeks around the courthouse. It's 10 to 9. The media frenzy reaches a fever pitch as Trump's motorcade arrives at the courthouse. The journalists head inside, and the only ones left waiting are regular New Yorkers, like Alejandro Meher.
I'm an attorney, so this is like my neck of the woods. I'd be stupid not to give it a shot, to see the opening statements.
But Meher's surprised that so few people are in line.
I was expecting more people from the public trying to get in. This is it? I mean, the whole New York City, this is it? I'm surprised.
Right behind Meher is Andrew Giuliani, son of the former New York City mayor. Trump is a family friend.
Almost like an uncle figure, and so here personally supportive of him.
That's why he wants to see the opening statements.
I want to see for my own 2 eyes kind of the judge, his mannerisms. I certainly have my suspicions with the judge. This is a sad and historic day in the history of our country.
It's now 10:30. The line to get in is totally gone. Now it's just the protesters.
This is a great day for democracy, a great day for the rule of law.
Mark Crawford Levitt is wearing a sparkling Star-Spangled Banner jacket and a sign that says, "Trump is a liar."
And I'm happy to be a New Yorker, and I'm happy that this trial is taking place.
He's also a musical satirist.
This is a duet between Trump and Putin. God bless America, lands that we love, from the red states to the red state, from the Capitol to the Kremlin's dome. God bless America, our Game of Thrones.
About 15 feet away, there's a couple dozen Trump supporters. Some are waving flags, some are chit-chatting, others are waiting for journalists to interview them.
Could I get your name?
Ora.
And your last name?
I don't have to give it to you. You seem to be a left-wing reporter.
Ora is wearing a Make America Great Again hat. She's originally from Colombia.
I am black and I am an immigrant. And I love this country. This country embraces us regardless of who we are and has given us the opportunity to succeed.
Sophia, who wouldn't say who she supports, says she's here to protect the democratic process.
And this is a travesty. This is not a trial. This is not a case. This is nonsense.
But passionate support for Trump only fills part of the long hours. It's around noon, and Ricky Caballero has been arguing with another man about American history for a while.
1776, they were enslaved. The Civil War didn't happen to the 1800s. 1776, they were still slaves. The Founding Fathers had slaves. The Founding Fathers had slaves.
Amid the ruckus, Mark Crawford Levitt takes out his flute for a patriotic tune.
Slaves. George Washington had slaves. It was a known fact that a lot of men slaves. Listen, everybody did not have indentured servants.
Whoa.
At 12:30, the court adjourned for the day. The trial and the circus around it is expected to last 6 weeks.
Want more?
Sure. Pascal Hogue, Columbia Radio News.
According to the Biden administration, last April the COVID-19 public health emergency is over, but a year since the announcement, the virus is still with us. According to a study released last month by Pew Research Center, COVID cases have been picking up since last fall.
At the same time, the number of New Yorkers getting the vaccine is dropping. Our reporter Cecilia Blato tells us why, 4 years into the pandemic, even those who opted for the first shots are becoming increasingly hesitant about the vaccine.
On a Saturday morning, Danny Dang is quietly typing away at his computer. His desk is tucked away behind endless rows of white metal shelves, stacked with plastic medication bottles. He's the leading pharmacist at Esco Pharmacy on 47th Street, just off 9th Avenue.
Right now we have the flu vaccines there, and we have the Shingrix vaccine. We have the hepatitis B vaccine.
At the height of the pandemic, his weekends looked a lot different. Dang would have been in a tiny cubicle, giving around 200 COVID shots per day, from morning till night. Demand for the vaccine seemed endless.
So it jammed up our phone line, it jammed up our email and inquiry on website.
He says he would receive a staggering 4,000 vaccine requests each day. But 4 years later, Dang's pharmacy is remarkably quiet. Only one customer is standing at the checkout counter. How many COVID vaccines would you say you do?
It's sad, but I have like 1 or 2 a week. It's not like before, and mostly usually the elder. So we will forget how serious it was, and just in general, we are getting fatigued. So that expected as a human behavior in general.
There are still thousands of Americans hospitalized with COVID each week. At the same time, this year has seen the lowest number of people getting vaccinated since the shot became available. It's been proven to be safe and effective, but in the last 6 months, just under a third of Americans have gotten a COVID booster, while almost double have opted for the flu shot. That's according to the Pew Research Center. There are lots of reasons why increasing numbers of people who originally opted for the shot are changing their minds, and some of them have been around since the beginning of the pandemic, like fear of potential bad side effects.
It's a continual deliberation for me, and I don't know that I've made the right decision.
Alison Jeffrey is a retired Columbia professor on the Upper West Side. She's in her late 60s and was excited to get the first 2 rounds of the COVID vaccine. At the time, she was dealing with a slow heart rate and was trying to stay healthy. But she says every time she got a shot, her health took a turn for the worse. For example, the night of her first dose, her heart rate increased dramatically, a condition known as tachycardia. She's pretty convinced that the vaccine caused it. Jeffrey underwent 2 operations to treat her heart problem. Given her age and her heart condition, her doctor remains adamant she must get the recent COVID vaccine, but she worries about the potential side effects.
I had so much trouble for a period of months with heart-related problems that really kept interfering with my life in a major way. So the idea of anything that could start that up again, I just can't face it.
Of course, a major reason Americans are saying no to the COVID shot is one we all know well: political views. But none of the New Yorkers I spoke to mentioned that. For Carla Stockton, a 77-year-old English teacher at Lehman College, her concern is the newness of the vaccine's mRNA science. The Pfizer shot was the first to use this technology, and when the pandemic first hit, Stockton looked forward to getting the first vaccine because of how deadly the virus could be.
If you were here in New York when the pandemic was in its initial stages, and every time you turn on the television, there's another picture of bodies, sitting in a parking lot, you want to believe that the government is going to protect you.
Times have changed and people are more relaxed about COVID prevention measures. But according to medical advice, many senior citizens should be getting the vaccines. And yet, while 1 in 4 Americans have chosen to have the flu vaccine, they choose not to get the COVID shot. Stockton is one of them.
I don't know anything about it. It's a whole new thing. It hasn't been around long enough to have a track record. And the flu vaccine has been around forever.
I would venture to say the COVID vaccine is one of the most studied vaccines of all time at this point.
That's according to Dr. Scott Roberts, a professor of infectious diseases at Yale School of Medicine. He says the COVID vaccine is actually more effective than the flu vaccine.
This past season, there was a 54% efficacy of COVID vaccine against illness. Flu vaccine was 42%. So usually, the flu vaccine has lower efficacy rates of that as COVID vaccines, which I think many don't know about.
But it's not just regular Americans who are vaccine hesitant. Roberts says those who work in the healthcare field are becoming more vaccine hesitant too. He surveyed his own medical colleagues at Yale, ones who worked specifically with COVID patients. He asked them, why are you reluctant to get the vaccine?
The most common reason was, I don't think the updated vaccine provides me any added protection. The second most common reason was, I've gotten too many vaccines already. And then the third most commonly selected reason was, I'm worried about the side effects of the updated vaccine.
But there are also new reasons for why people are switching their stance on the shot. Sarah Gorman founded an online advice column like a virtual Dear Abby, but for COVID advice. She says one big reason doesn't have to do with misinformation, just lack of access.
It was less convenient to get it because they weren't vaccine clinics everywhere you turned.
Just 3 years ago, there were over 250 community-based pop-up sites across the city administering the COVID vaccine. Places like school gyms, churches, and libraries became walk-in clinics for vaccinations and testing. Now they've resumed their pre-pandemic roles, and Gorman's organization has grown into a team of female scientists called Those Nerdy Girls, who post bite-sized science news across social media.
To equip you, our audience, with the tools to fact-check
And
on
another
your own.
concern she's seen that persuades those who once got the shot now to decline is money.
And also there was a cost barrier in a lot of cases. These weren't universally covered by the government anymore.
The vaccine is no longer free for those without insurance and can cost up to $150 per dose, which could also discourage people from getting it. So what could you do if you want to encourage someone in your life to get the vaccine? Gorman says her team has interventionists who work on social media to do just that.
And something that we did realize pretty early on is that when there is somebody who is really entrenched, like it's a big part of their identity, your ability to talk them down from that is always going to be limited.
But she says one must not give up. You may not be able to change their mind, but you can try to communicate the facts to them. And hey, maybe you'll convince someone who's reading the comments too. As for Alison Jeffrey, the retired professor with the heart condition, she's planning to reconsider the vaccine.
I mean, I really think there's hope. I mean, I think, at some point, I probably will need to bite the bullet. I mean, I've continued to mask on the subway. Probably a lot of people think I'm crazy, but, I have to take care of my health.
Jeffrey wants to take the vaccine, but only if she's confident it has fewer side effects. She's been doing research on new vaccine technologies and hopes they will become available one day. Cecilia Blotto, Columbia Radio News.
In New York City, becoming a foster parent requires mandatory training. But during the pandemic, those trainings were shortened and moved on to Zoom. Now, critics say they no longer cover enough and don't provide the practical skills you need to deal with kids in real life. Tommaso Boragno reports.
Abby is a mom in New York City. Her son is young, which can make holding meetings from home tough, especially on the phone.
The things that they were saying, so a lot of it just wasn't easily applicable. Oh, I'm so sorry. 1 second. What happened? Why? I don't know why. I'm sorry, buddy. Yeah, give me a second because I'm on the phone. I'll be out in just a minute. You want to sit with me? Okay, guys. Sorry.
I'm not using your full name because Abby is a foster parent. She is critical of the foster training system, and she's worried that if she speaks out, her son could be taken away.
The trainings that I've been to, or at least that first initial training, it was just like rushed. It felt like they were trying to get through it just to get it done, like sharing a lot of information, but it wasn't very interactive.
Like all foster parents in New York City, Abby needed to get certified, 15 mandatory hours of parenting basics, and 24 hours focused on childhood trauma, all on Zoom. But Abby says she would have appreciated more hands-on training. She thinks that role-playing different scenarios and bringing in former foster children and foster parents could have been more helpful.
And it wasn't at all helpful. Like, the person who was training it, I felt like had never met a human child, and it just wasn't very helpful.
These concerns are shared by many foster parents I've had the chance to talk with. During the pandemic, the training moved to Zoom, and they were shortened from 30 to 10 hours, and apparently the parents like Abby say they're not learning enough. Emily Sherman, another foster mom in New York City, is grateful that the online trainings allowed her to get certified. She works in the film industry and had been too busy to attend in person until the pandemic hit.
I had talked to this agency a bunch of times about wanting to do it and trying to make it work, and then a new job would come up and I wouldn't be able to do it. So when the pandemic happened, they called me and they said, "We're doing our first Zoom class. Do you want to do it?" And I was like, yes, absolutely.
Sherman says that on one hand, Zoom opens up opportunities for people to get certified, but on the other, she is skeptical about the content of the classes.
But I also think that the nature of being a foster parent is really boots on the ground with kids, whether it's bath time, changing, feeding a baby, or helping a 12-year-old with homework, or cooking dinner for your family and all of the kids. And so Zoom training is not designed for people that already have a very full plate to give 100% of their attention.
John Landsberg is the founding director of the Child and Adolescent Services Research Center at Children's Hospital in San Diego. He says the training is focused on explaining roles to foster parents, like that their job is to prepare the kids for a potential reunion with their birth family. And he is worried that the trainings do not include enough practical experience.
Now, it's not that agencies don't give training. They do. But it's mostly kind of operational training. And much less was there training on how to deal with these children that were coming into their home.
But what if the children you foster have behavioral issues? During my reporting, I encountered stories of foster kids who'd set fires and even attacked their foster parents. But remember, foster parents receive only 24 hours of trauma-focused training. Landsberg says he doesn't have a problem with the length of the training, but the content.
And a high proportion of kids in child welfare have some kind of mental health problems. But trauma-focused is not necessarily training a foster parent, on how to deal with the child.
Landsberg says one solution is providing trainings after foster kids arrive in their new homes. When asked about parents and expert concerns, the Administration for Children's Services, the agency that oversees children's services in the city, didn't respond to our request for comment. Tommaso Baronio, Columbia Radio News.
There's a new effort to legalize psychedelics in New York State. 2 bills have been proposed. They are intended to allow the use of psychedelics in therapy or for limited personal use. And support is coming from a corner that may seem unusual: religious organizations.
But as Uptown Radio's Christina Macaya reports, there's a long history of religious groups incorporating psychedelics into their practices, and it's having a revival.
Walking by the Alden Building on Central Park West, it looks just like any other luxury property on the Upper West Side. but it's also listed as the address for the Temple of the True Inner Light. The temple, which also refers to itself as a church, practices a revisionist Christianity and uses psychedelics such as DMT, cannabis, and mushrooms as a sacrament. If you Google them, you won't find more than a brief wiki page. So I stopped by the building to learn more.
Hi, how are you? So I'm looking for, Google Maps says it's here. It's a place called the Temple of the True Inner Light. Is that a thing?
There's a temple on 82nd Street.
82nd?
I mean 83rd.
84th.
Synagogue.
Okay, got it.
No, but there's no business here.
There's none here. Interesting. Okay, weird. They said he was here. Okay, never mind. Good to know.
No luck. But what I did discover on an online forum called shroomery.org is that the Temple of the True Inner Light is sometimes referred to as a cult. Mike Mariancini is the author of Psychedelic Cults and Outlaw Churches. He wrote a chapter on the Temple of the True Inner Light in his book.
They're kind of like very radical hippies.
But Mariancini says the temple isn't a cult, and it's one of a growing number of non-traditional religious groups built around the use of psychedelics.
Their sacrament was DPT, which is a relative of DMT, which is very illegal. And usual procedure there was you would go to the church and have a short interview. If they thought you were cool, they would give you a dose of the DPT smoked in a pipe with raspberry leaves, listen to Bible readings, and just kind of have this very fast but very intense psychedelic experience.
Mariancini says there's a long history of psychedelics used in religion, like groups native to both North and South America, who use peyote, a cactus with psychedelic properties.
It's something that you see all over the world. I once heard that the only people on Earth who do not use any kind of intoxicant traditionally are in the North Pole. Everybody else has something. And a lot of the times these substances were associated with religion and magic and shamanism and really radically changing one's consciousness so as to bring the divine into daily life.
Mariancini says he finds it funny that the use of psychedelics is having a religious renaissance. And it does seem to be growing in popularity. All I had to do was search Instagram. I found the Hummingbird Church. It calls itself a multi-faith organization and offers retreats in Utah, California, Missouri, and Oregon, where participants use ayahuasca, a type of psychedelic. Ayahuasca has its own religious history and has its own legal battles. Then there are newer substances. Zachary Stamp served in the Marines in Afghanistan. He suffered from PTSD and found his way to Buddhism after being offered LSD at a party.
I'd heard of it before, so I was like, okay, I'll take it. And I ended up having an incredibly profound experience where I was able to see my life in a non-judgmental way. I mean, anybody that's had a psychedelic experience will talk about a point where they feel like they're one with everything, where they see how they're connected with each other and with the universe. And so after that experience, that's when I got into recovery and I started meditating, and that led me to Buddhism.
Stam says he supports the legalization of psilocybin. But like many traditional religions, he says the use of psychedelics is also stigmatized in Buddhism. He supports the 2 new bills that have been proposed to legalize psychedelics in New York and says legalizing it could help cut down on stigma.
It's a hot button issue in Buddhism because some view it as not cheating, but skipping very important steps to get to altered states of consciousness, whereas other people view it the way I do as a catalyst into seeking deep spirituality and into these disciplines.
There can also be stigma around psychedelics in other traditional religions, such as Orthodox Judaism. Aaron Ganuth is an Orthodox Jew who practices with LSD.
The spread has been pretty remarkable, but I wouldn't say that it's become part of mainstream traditional Jewish practice. One of the benefits in the Orthodox world is there's somewhat less stigmatization, having profound, mind-blowing experiences on psilocybin and LSD in particular.
And Ganuth says that's what some Orthodox Jews are doing, integrating new ways to practice old traditions.
There are some people that prefer to take a psychedelic before Shabbat, so they're really connecting to the spiritual roots of it and the internal and external spiritual connective points. And many people who specifically don't, who will use it in a more ceremonial setting. I'm more of an active proponent of bringing psychedelics, whether it's the active use of them, like using psychedelics during, let's say, a Passover Seder or another Shabbat, using them in the prayers and just the intentionality of it.
Aaron Ganuth is at a retreat upstate right now. He's still observing Passover. As for the two bills which would legalize psychedelics, their next step is to pass through state assembly. Christina Makaya, Columbia Radio News.
And now, Clara Bowders provides a new entry to the Personal Perspective series. After years of doubting herself, she discusses how a single sentence taught her self-compassion.
You think you can hurt me? You're gonna have to get in line. For years, no one could be more critical of me than me. The internal critique of my body began at 17, when I felt a transition from being a girl to being a woman. Seemingly overnight, shopping with my mom and my sister was no longer my favorite activity. Suddenly, clothes I tried on didn't just automatically fit me. Before then, I might not have liked something because the color didn't suit me, or I didn't like the way the fabric felt on my skin, like wool. Oh my god, I can still feel it itching just thinking about it. But I never had to worry about clothes fitting. Until this one day, I tried on a dress and all I could see was that it was too tight, in a bad way. My hips too wide. My once reliable body just didn't look like mine, or at least that's all I could see. When I went to feel nostalgic for my childhood, I watched videotapes of my family thanks to one of my dad's earliest purchases, a video recorder. I watched how my two brothers, my sister and I, sang along with the theme songs of our favorite series and built pillow forts in our living room. And when I see myself as that little 4-year-old girl with her chunky cheeks, her blonde bob, and a bright smile that could light up a room, I feel very protective. No one should ever hurt this child. But then I realize I have been the one who has been hurting her the most. Why would I ever do that? It wasn't easy to let go of those negative thoughts. Therapy helped, certainly, as did the unwavering support of friends. But it was always 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But a real turning point came from someone I didn't necessarily expect. My dad. In our family, New Year's resolutions mean friendly challenges we design for each other for the year ahead. For instance, my challenge for my brother this year, read 20 books, 5 more than the year before. And to my mom, take those Italian lessons. She's always wanted to learn. And last year, my dad's wish for me was simple. Try loving yourself. Suddenly, a playful challenge held a world of meaning for me. To know that my father, who always see me through adoring eyes, saw my self-doubt. It cut him deeply, and I really hated seeing my dad hurt. I had to really commit to changing my ways. So I set out on a new mission, to be kinder to myself, to love this body that has carried me through so much, and I hope will carry me through so much more. Now, when I'm looking in the mirror or eating a piece of cheesecake, I'm gentle with myself. I say positive things and imagine myself as an old woman, knitting my 70-second scarf, and remember how much joy I had, rather than the years spent tearing myself apart. It's everyday work, but don't worry, Dad. I got this.
Clara Bowders is still working on being kinder to herself. Aren't we all?
That's it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Our executive producer today was Maureen Saint. Lindy Garastaff of Reporters was senior producer Faima Degia, joined by assistant producer Dean Condoleo. And shipping up, the edition was senior editor Samuel Eli Shepard, with the help of assistant editor Pascal Ho.
In the studio today as the director was Claire Davenport. Julia Leo was in charge of Soundbite. In control of webcasting and social media was Christina Makaya, and working the board was Cecilia Blotto.
Desiree Nick Farjam and Clara Bowders delivered our local newscasts and spots, and day reporter Dominic Holt Thomas brought you the latest on the ground in New York. Today, Personal Perspective were brought to you by Irina Yumenuk and also Clara Bowders.
Our instructors, Sally Herships, Carrie Donahue, and Priscilla Labby advised our staff. and we are your hosts. I'm Zoe E.
And I'm Tommaso Baronio. Uptown Radio is live Thursday at 4, but you can find us 7 days a week at uptownradio.org. And from all of us here in the studio, thanks for listening.
No stress. Yeah. No.
Yeah, I didn't want it to sound
Straight
too...
to the heart.
Yeah.
Stop the live.
We can just talk.
The recording is on, so when we download it, we can hear this.
Yeah, but we're not saying nothing inconvenient.
Okay, first we'll do Desiree's newscast, then we'll do Claire's newscast, and then I don't know where Dom is, but then we'll do Dom's.
Okay, so, but that means that I start, though. I'll start.
You start or me?
No, I start, and then I introduce you, of course.
But I have to do my
no,
first.
yeah.
I'm doing the first newscast, and then we'll go to your newscast, and then I'll.
Oh, they also
doing it all.
did the row. Oh, they did the.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't hear us.
Oh.
It's fine. We'll start.
Yeah.
Wait, we're gonna check that we have the right newscast clip. This is the
You're too loud. You're way too loud. Yeah.
It's Ashley Judd.
You got this.
It's about their motives.
Nope. It's Ashley Judd saying today is a day like every day.
So you concede.
Nope. Those are for my spot.
You're
What
too
the
loud.
heck? There's the spots. Spot 1 and 2 are for
the spot
Clara's. And then clip, newscast clips, Ashley Judd and Luffs. And New Yorker.
Do I need to check for you?
No.
And today is a day like every day in American women's lives.
I was shocked and I was appalled.
I hope the first thing they do is get in touch with the president of Kenya, William Ruto. I hope the first
I was shocked.
In New York, I'm Desiree Nikfarjam. Here at Columbia, student protesters have about 12 hours from now to come to a decision with the university administration. The school has agreed to one of the protesters' demands, transparency in the school's investments. Still to be determined whether the university will divest from all companies doing business with Israel and amnesty for any of the student protesters. If a decision is not made by 4 a.m., it is still unclear whether they will have to pack up their tents from the Gaza Solidarity encampment. The campus is still closed for the public, but at 6:30 tonight, a United for Israel counter-protest will be held outside the campus gates. And as you heard in the NPR newscast, a New York appeals court overturned Harvey Weinstein's 2020 rape conviction this morning. Actress and activist Ashley Judd's testimony was critical to Weinstein's conviction. She spoke on today's appeal and in solidarity with the victims of sexual assault.
And today is a day, like every day in American women's lives, when male sexual violence has intruded and disrupted our lives.
Some New Yorkers are also upset about the overturning. Here's one.
I was shocked and I was appalled for that verdict to be overturned, for all those women that were sexually assaulted.
Weinstein, who is 72 years old, will still be imprisoned in California for an unrelated rape conviction, for which he was sentenced 16 years. New Yorkers, be ready. Hotels and bunkers for bees are coming. It's all part of a new initiative by the city in partnership with the Horticulture Society of New York and Rutgers to make the city more hospitable for bees throughout the city. The city tested the project last year in Brooklyn and the Bronx and will now place bee hotels in Manhattan and Staten Island. And in sports, the Knicks are in Philadelphia tonight for Game 3 of the NBA playoffs, and the NFL draft begins tonight, with both the Giants and Jets picking in the top 10. The weather is currently 54 degrees, and there are fairly clear skies throughout this evening, with a low of 40 degrees.
For Columbia Radio News, I'm Clara Bowders. The U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments today on whether Donald Trump can claim immunity to charges related to January 6th. Desiree Nikfarjam reports.
In nearly 3 hours of testimony. In nearly 3 hours of testimony, the justices appeared skeptical about granting blanket immunity for the office of the president. In his questions, Justice Neil Gorsuch indicated that former President Donald Trump's specific plea for immunity isn't the main issue here.
I hope the first thing they do is get in touch with the president of Kenya, William Ruto, and figure out a way to get the Kenyan-led multinational support mission into Haiti as soon as possible.
They don't get it. The Prime Minister.
Yeah.
So, okay. When I start my newscast, I introduce Desiree, so you have to have her clips ready for her spot.
I'm not concerned about this case.
So you concede that private
For Columbia Radio News, I'm Clara Bowders. The U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments today on whether Donald Trump can claim immunity to charges related to January 6th. Desiree Nick-Farjam reports.
During nearly 3 hours of hearings, the justices appeared skeptical about granting blanket immunity to the office of the president. In his questions, Justice Neil Gorsuch indicated that former President Donald Trump's specific plea for immunity isn't the main issue here.
I'm not concerned about this case, but I am concerned about future uses of the criminal law to target political opponents based on accusations about their motives.
Justice Amy Coney Barrett questioned Donald Trump's attorney, John Sauer, about whether any act committed by a president while in office is a public act.
So you concede that private acts don't get immunity?
We do.
Okay. So in the special counsel's brief on pages 46 and 47, he urges us, even if we were to decide or assume that there was some sort of immunity for official acts, that there were sufficient private acts in the indictment for the case to go back and the trial to begin immediately. And I want to know if you agree or disagree about the characterization of these acts as private.
As alleged, we dispute the allegation, but that sounds private to me.
Sounds private.
It's still unclear how quickly they will come to a decision for Trump's hearing, specifically.
The Prime Minister of Haiti, Ariel Henry, has resigned. A new presidential council has been sworn in. William O'Neill, a human rights expert on Haiti, says now that transitional officials are in place, it may smooth the way for an outside security force to arrive.
I hope the first thing they do is get in touch with the president of Kenya, William Ruto, and figure out a way to get the Kenyan-led multinational support mission into Haiti as soon as possible.
Last October, the United Nations Security Council passed a resolution authorizing an international force to be sent into Haiti. Gang violence has killed or injured more than 2,500 people from January to March, and the national police are outgunned and outnumbered by gangs. Kenya had agreed to lead the mission. American officials have confirmed Ukraine has begun using long-range ballistic missiles against Russia that were secretly provided by the U.S. Officials said the plan had not been announced publicly to prevent the information from falling into the wrong hands. Ukrainian forces have suffered from a shortage of ammunition and air defense systems in recent months, and officials there have blamed delays in military aid from the U.S. and other Western allies for the loss of lives and territory in their country. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said on Wednesday it was possible that Russia could make additional tactical gains in the coming weeks. According to a new report from the Commerce Department, the U.S. economy grew at an annual rate of just 1.6% in the first 3 months of this year. That is a substantial decrease from the end of last year and slower growth than forecasters had expected. But consumer spending, the largest driver of the economy, has held up fairly well. Consumers continue to spend more on services including restaurant meals and travel, although they've cut back on big purchases like cars and furniture. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Clara Bowders.